Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Jennifer Perry, co-founder of FosterMore. Very, very happy to be the moderator of this really important and significant evening where we've gathered together some extraordinary documentarians, advocates, writers, poets, people who've experienced foster care, people who've told stories about it, to bring together an evening where we can discuss this issue, which some of you know about, but it still merits greater awareness. And that's why we have this esteemed panel here to give you their different perspectives and really give you a feel for what is foster care. How does it fit into child welfare? Who are foster youth? And what can we do to raise awareness and improve outcomes for these youth using the tools that we have in the entertainment industry, which are tremendous. So everyone here has a deep understanding of these issues and has used their power to speak, write, tell stories, to move the needle on the issue in a really significant way. So I am going to first do very brief introductions of our panelists because all of them have an extraordinary history and they can fill in as they see fit as they address all of you. But first I wanted to really profoundly thank the Writers Guild for providing this forum. Again, this is an issue that's sometimes overlooked, and it's really important that we bring this to the fore and tell you about the resiliency of youth in foster care and the ways that we can move to change the system. And a profound thanks as well to Greg Mitchell, who pulled this all together. Took a tremendous amount of work and many emails, and he's really been terrific. And to the panel that helped pull us together, as opposed to the panel right now, Angela Harvey and Roseanne Welch and Alexa Schultz. And also I have to thank Kristen Pratt from FosterMore because she was instrumental in making this happen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panelists in no particular order. The Brady Bunch screen, as Greg calls it, the order changes for each one of us. So I'm simply introducing the order that I see them on my screen. First off is Leah Martin. And Leah is a FOST-adopt parent, an educational advocate, a storyteller, a screenwriter, among numerous other things that, again, I'll let her expand on. We're really excited to have her here because she tells the stories and she's lived the experience that I think she'll be able to tell all of you about. Next, that I'm seeing on my screen is Antoine Fisher. Antoine is a screenwriter. He didn't put in his bio, but I happen to know he's also an artist. He's the author. His autobiography was turned into an extraordinary film called Finding Fish that I hope many of you have seen. And if you have not, I hope that you do. It's an extraordinary story of his journey and his hurdles and his obstacles and the way that he overcame them. He's been an extraordinary advocate for youth in foster care. And again, does many, many other things in addition to that. The next person I see is Michael Perri, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Michael was in foster care until the age of 10. He was adopted, experienced a tremendous tragedy, and has gone on to, as I understand it, work for a number of agencies. And I believe there's a wonderful spy thread that runs throughout his personal history that I would love for him to tell you more about. And he's involved in a project related to that currently. Mark Harris is an esteemed documentarian, an Academy Award-winning documentarian. I won't go through his credits. Many of you know them, covering really important issues from children in the Holocaust to most recently Foster, a documentary that took a really profound look at youth in foster care in Los Angeles County, told their stories, really enriched people's understanding, was also award-winning. And he worked on it with his partner, Deborah Oppenheimer, who some of you may know and I know well. Next up is Peter Paige. Again, many, many talents, but co-creator of The Fosters, which was, I believe, the first network show to really delve into and really so beautifully portray foster families and foster youth. And I know how inspiring Peter is because not only did he win numerous awards, from the GLAAD Award to the TV Academy Honors, two of his young stars traveled to Washington to advocate for foster youth. So they weren't just part of the show, they took it to the streets. So I think that tells you how compelling his story was. And then last but not least is Rob Woronoff, who's had extensive experience in the child welfare field. Again, too long to mention, so I will just say that he's currently the director of Sanctuary Palm Springs, which is a housing program for transition-age foster youth. And he currently has a very exciting new project coming down the pike that deals with foster issues with some very exciting talent. So that is our panel. You are lucky to be able to hear from all of them because, again, the variety of viewpoints in the experience, I think it's unique. It's something we're all seeing tonight, and it will really enhance your understanding. And I hope, in the end, move you to action. So I'm just going to open up with a broad question, and then pepper this with a few questions down the line. But this is your opportunity to hear from the panelists, not from me. So the first sort of broad question that I'd love for you all to address is, all of you have worked on projects that they're storytelling, but they're also supposed to inform and move people to action. So how do you balance, informing people and moving people with keeping them engaged and entertained? Anyone want to take that on?
I'll dive in.
Okay, Peter.
I'll dive in. Hi, by the way, I'm so honored to be on this panel with this really extraordinary group of talented people who use the various media in which they work for good and to move the conversation. So, my personal belief is like stories got to come out of something, and it might as well come out of truth. It might as well come out of lived experience. It might as well be about things that matter. And that does not in any way, shape, or form mean that it has to be dry or boring or pontificating, or preachy. I think that when you anchor your storytelling in the nuances and shades of truth, people relate. Universally. So I think as long as you're not sort of rattling off a dry list of factoids, I think there's really human ways to reach people and to shift their thinking while at the same time entertaining them.
Peter, can you maybe give an example of some of the reaction to the Fosters? How you touched and moved your viewers?
Well, interesting that first I want to talk about the first reaction to the Fosters. The reaction to the word that we were doing the Fosters was, for most of the foster community, was bad. They were afraid. They thought for sure it was going to be a bad seed story. They thought for sure we were there to exploit sort of those stories. There was a lot of fear, and understandably, because that's frankly that's what you see on Law and Order, right? That's the Law and Order story of the week, is the foster kid who went wild and killed the bio kid in the family or whatever. And so often that's how foster kids have been portrayed. So we were very cognizant right away that we were holding a hot coal, and we needed to be careful how we moved forward with it. But very quickly, once the show went on the air, even in the pilot, where Callie is brought into this home, and you meet Callie, and she's a hurting kid, and she's shut down, and she's obfuscating, and you learn, right away, you learn at the end of the hour, basically, that like her heart's in the right place, and she's trying everything she's doing. She's trying to get her brother out of an abusive foster home. Anyway, it was from the get-go. People were moved, touched. Season 1 of the show, Congresswoman Karen Bass brought a group of 50 foster kids to the set, and we talked to them all about the industry and work and how it all works. And we had lunch with them, and I was sitting down, and I vividly remember talking to many of those kids and saying, sort of, what do you think? How do you feel? Does it seem like the truth to you? And they all said it was amazing to see something that reflected their lives. A few of them said they wished that they'd landed in a house that, in a family that was as nice as this family along the road. But they all felt that the sort of story points we were grabbing the challenges, the shifts, the way, the unmooring, the things that they dealt with on a regular basis were being honestly and accurately portrayed, and they were really moved and grateful to see that.
Antoine, you put your story out there. I mean, it was out there. Your story was told. It was your story. I mean, what were the challenges there? What were your concerns about what might sort of, particularly since in some cases you were bringing it out to an audience that what may or may not have been that familiar with, foster care and had a lot of presuppositions?
Well, when I first started, I think I was ripe to tell my story. I had spent my entire childhood in foster care. Part of it, toward the end of my time, they put me in a reform school because they couldn't find a placement for me. So they sent me to Pennsylvania, and I was in a reform school till I graduated from high school. I graduated from high school when I was 17, and they made me an emancipated minor. And they brought me back to Cleveland and put me in a men's shelter. And this is when I started my period of homelessness. I had stayed on the street till December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. And I saw the sign that said, "Join the Navy and see the world." And I joined the Navy. I stayed for 11 years. And so by the time I finished my time in the Navy and a few years after that, I felt like I had collected so much emotional heartache and so many experiences that were unique to me. Even though I was always around other foster children, I realized time to time this person is having a unique experience that none of the rest of us are having. I understood those things. I was a reflective kid. And by the time I wound up at Sony Pictures, the idea of writing a story and any of that, I didn't even know people wrote movies. I didn't know how it happened, never thought about it. But when I was a security guard on the lot, and the idea that people were writing stories, compelling stories, some of them, when I was on the lot, I didn't think of myself as ever writing, but I actually found my family while I was working there. And I had just started and I couldn't go and meet them. So I told my boss that I wanted to go meet my family. He said, "No, because when you leave, you won't have your job when you come back." So I told him my entire story and he said, "Go on and go." And when I came back, Barry Josephson, a lot of executives from Columbia and TriStar wanted to talk to me about my story. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I could write it. I had never been to college, never went to film school or had any writing experience, and I'm dyslexic and I have anxiety as well. But I had overcome so much, I didn't think it was such a big deal. So I was ripe at the time. It was the right time and I was in the right place. And just having had the experience of meeting my family, all the things that I had experienced on my own, I was like ready to say it to someone. And besides, when I told my boss my story, a story that I was always ashamed of, I would never tell anybody. I have so many stories about how I learned it was better not to tell anybody. I told him it wasn't the compassion he showed for letting me go, but the surprise on his face that I had been working for him and he hadn't a clue, I couldn't see it on my face, that I had been through all of that. And so I felt that if I could change my life by writing my own story, then I should give it a try. Everyone kept saying no because I hadn't been to college, no writing experience. So I got some legal pads and some paper towels from the men's room, and I just started writing out of anger at the people who told me that I couldn't do it. And then eventually I met Todd Black, and he said that who else would write it? So everything seemed to be just happening, and I was just ready. And I didn't know that it would affect people. I was just doing it because the opportunity was there. I didn't know that it would change my life in the way that it had. So it almost was like everything else in my life. I had stopped planning my life early on. I was just kind of moving slowly through life, looking around, listening, that kind of thing. And I found myself in Hollywood and listening and watching. And fell in a hole, and here I am still in there. Beautiful hole, though. Wonderful hole to be in.
Leah, Antoine talks about life doesn't always go how you planned it. I know that you are a foster adopt mom. I'm going to tell us a little about that journey and the unexpected parts of that journey and how it's informed your current work in terms of your writing and what you're doing now.
Sure, absolutely was not planned. I had been doing some advocacy work. I'm just one of those people that always had in my heart, even as a young child, to help other children. And when I got to LA, I started working for this group, Stand Up for Kids. And through that organization, I planned events for the kids, but we had to release them. You weren't allowed to exchange phone numbers, email addresses. You basically would meet them where they were. A number of them had run away from foster care, they had arrived basically unhoused by different methods, but a lot of the children who run away from other cities end up in Los Angeles for the same reasons we're here. They want to be in Hollywood, it's warmer, all those things. And that experience wasn't the right one for me because I had to keep letting them go. And so you would get attached to a kid, you would see them a few times, and then that would be the end. And I needed to end the story for me. Like for me, my service needed to be more entrenched than that. And so I began the journey of training to become an actual foster mom, parent with my husband. And we got the call, and within months, and it was sooner than I thought. And they said to us to love the child as if the child was going to be there forever, but you're a foster parent, so that might not happen. And I was like, I don't know how else to love a child. So we loved him as if he were going to be there forever. And when the opportunity came, when the separation was finalized in the courts, I don't even remember what it's called now, but we said, absolutely, this is our son now. We don't see any other way. And so that for me was more of, initially I thought a service to him, but it actually became a service to us, because anytime you love someone, as everyone knows, you get so much more back when you give. So that was my journey. And so as I've walked those steps with him, it absolutely informs how I come to, fans of work such as the Fosters and the lens through which I write stories. My pilot that I used to get my current job was based on my relationship with my son. So he shows up in a lot of my work just because we're so connected. I honestly joke all the time. I forget that he did not come the biological way, because we are just so in tune with each other. And he's just such a part of our family.
Great. Antoine, you talked a lot about lived experience, and Michael, you have it as well. So I don't know if this is the right word, but what advice would you give how did you find telling your story, and what advice would you give to people who are sharing their lived story?
Sure. Again, honored to be here. Thanks. Well, Peter in the Fosters kind of summed up what I think I learned, but I couldn't crystallize. So thank you, Peter. Callie is having a hard moment, as I've had my whole life. I was born Emmanuel Pedro. I had 5 different name changes in 10 years before becoming Michael Perri. I was born, grew up in the 80s and had identity issues and abandonment issues, and I did everything I could to stay. And what I learned throughout all that was DNA doesn't make a family, love does. And Peter said that, and his wonderful writers and actors said that. And it really is true. We have chosen families, right, in work and our professional life. Leah's son. And what conquers all is love. And I write about love through the lens of feeling stuck, feeling unwanted, feeling awkward, feeling, just like an alien on this planet. And I'm sure anybody who's gone through that adversity feels the same way. But I think that's relatable. I think wanting to be loved is relatable. I think what ends up happening, what I hope to do, from an optimistic perspective, is persist. Because I persisted. And I've actually had people call me a persistent MFer. And it's only because I wanted to find love, right? It's really hard. But at the end of the day, that's what I think matters. That love does conquer all, and especially now in this crazy time, in this pandemic. And if you can find love and then reciprocate that love and spread the love through storytelling in relatable ways, that sometimes teaches you that, it's not going to be, nothing's going to be sugar-coated. Sometimes life's hard and sometimes life's beautiful, but to enjoy it and to persist.
Thank you, Michael. Rob, I'm going to come to you, but I want to ask Mark. I think that sort of epitomizes the documentary about persistence and the difficulty and love and everyone, the search for that, which is a very difficult journey if you are a child who has been in foster care. So, Mark, the stories you told were so compelling. What resonated the most with you as you were working on the documentary?
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having me on the panel. The question you asked at the very beginning is, how do you do this? And I think it's, for me, storytelling, the essence of storytelling is characters. And as a documentary filmmaker, you're always looking for compelling characters that the audience can relate to. And there are so many stigmas about foster care. So many kids are ashamed of being foster kids, hide their background, don't want to let people know, don't want to be seen as that kid who has a social worker or the kid with many names, the kid from different families. I've always, in a lot of my work, have been interested in resilience. Before I started as a filmmaker, or in between my filmmaking career, I've written 5 children's novels, and the novels are always about kids having to deal with problems created by adults, that they have to cope with the consequences of that. And foster care is like a perfect example of that. Kids don't go into foster care because of anything they've done, although they often blame themselves for being in foster care and think it's their fault. But they're in foster care because of what their parents have done, or their parents' inability to take care of them. And I was very interested, and Deborah and I, my partner in this, were interested in looking beyond the stereotypes and beyond the stigmas and we spent a long time researching this, because this is not a world in which we were really acquainted. And what struck us was, despite all the negative stereotypes about kids in foster care, about social workers, about the system, we were struck by the many people who were really committed to trying to improve the lives of these children they work with. I mean, the system has many, many problems, but it also draws people who are very compassionate, want to do the best for the child under very difficult circumstances. And that's what we were struck by. And I think that's what finally was part of the message of the film. And, Michael mentioned love. And I think the most important thing that we saw, that for a child to have resilience, to thrive, they needed somebody to love them unconditionally. They needed some adult who believed in them, who believed in their possibility. And if there was one adult like that, in their lives, they had a chance to thrive.
Thank you for that, and that's true. That's what the research has shown. Many of you say there was just one person, whether it was a teacher or a coach or someone who touched them and said, "You are worthwhile. You are resilient." And we often say that the way we want to change the landscape is for people not to say, "Oh, you're in foster care," but to say, "Oh my God, you were in foster care and you made it this far. You must be extraordinarily resilient. What can I do to help you realize the resilience that has gotten you this far?" So, Rob, it's an issue that runs throughout the resilience. Is it something you'll be looking at? I assume it's something you'll be sort of looking at as threading through your new project, or is that a totally unfair characterization and I should let you talk about your new project?
No, thanks. No, that's a totally fair characterization. So really, I'm so happy to be among all of you and talking about this. I've worked in the foster care system for almost 30 years, and which I got into by accident. I came out of Carnegie Mellon with a drama degree and went to New York to be an actor and was an actor, and started volunteering during the day because I had my days free, and the kids I was volunteering with were either homeless kids or kids in foster care, and realized exactly how resilient they were and how much more interesting working with them was to me than being on stage at night, which I thought sort of anybody could do. I had read in the paper that the Massachusetts governor was forming this new commission, and it was going to be working with LGBT youth, and I'm a gay man, and I was very interested in those kids in particular. So I picked up the phone and I called the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, which is where the money was going to be run through, and I said, "I have a completely useless Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in drama, and you need to hire me to run this commission." And I sort of talked my way in. In the bargain, got to develop a lot of HIV prevention programming, particularly for young people. And I started hearing kids say things like, "As soon as I get HIV, I can get services," right? Which is insane, because so many kids are just left without services, but by then, HIV services were coming up. And so it was almost an incentive for them, which I thought was insane. So I picked up the phone again and I called this huge foster care agency in Boston. And I said, "You need to hire me because we need to expand programming mostly for homeless kids and for homeless LGBT kids in particular." Anyway, got to develop programs there and met so many kids who were so resilient and so hopeful, and realized that they have such deep wells of empathy and understanding for other people and a desire to help other people. One young woman I met who was only a young teenager at the time, my husband and I ended up adopting her. She's now getting an MSW at Simmons College in Boston. She'll be a social worker. And as a Black trans girl coming up in foster care, she had lots and lots and lots of challenges. And when you meet her, her smile just lights up a room. And that's not atypical for a lot of kids in foster care, right? Anyway, I started working at the Child Welfare League of America in Washington, D.C., and ran programs all around the country where I got to meet infinite amounts of young people like David Ambrose, who one of the co-founders of FosterMore. And after a number of years of working with these young people, I thought, no one is telling their stories. Really, Antoine, for a long time, we only had you to point to for a really long time. And every other story, Peter, as you mentioned, right? The stories that were told were the very things stopping us from being able to tell better stories because they scared people. And so somebody in my class at Carnegie Mellon was Blair Underwood, and he's remained a good friend, and his sister is adopted. And I called him and I said, "Do you want to put together a TV series? Because TV can change people's hearts and minds, right? The government spends $34 billion a year on foster care, and we don't have enough foster parents. Every agency tries to reach out to foster parents. We don't have enough foster parents. Antoine, you were sent to a shelter because there was no family for them to place you with, which is an American tragedy, right? And I think parents don't open their homes and their hearts, Leah, as you did, because they're scared, because the stories that we've told about these kids scare them, right? We don't tell them Antoine's story. We don't tell them David Ambrose's story and other people's, Nia's story. So Blair, I said, "Do you want to develop this show?" He said, "Would you move to LA? I said, "I'll move to LA if you want to develop this show." So he said yes, and I said yes, and I moved to LA. And as we started to shop it around, Peter, this was right before you sold the Fosters, people weren't interested because of the subject matter. And we even met with a guy who was running one of the most violent shows I've ever seen on television, who said foster kids are scary, right? He rapes, murders, and mangles people every single week, and people watch it. but foster kids are scary. And I thought, that's nuts. So sort of put it away for a while because I had to keep, sort of working in my field. A couple of years ago, Blair was doing a limited series with Tiffany Haddish. And I called him up and I said, Blair, Tiffany was a foster kid and she is a dynamo. And he said, Rob and I are working on this project. Would you like to work on this with us? And she, if I can say this, her exact words were, fuck yeah. So now the three of us, and once we got Tiffany Haddish on board, it's not that Blair doesn't have muscle, he certainly does, but I think because of Tiffany's lived experience. So they are developing the show with me. We have a wonderful, wonderful person who's helping me with the script, who came up in Shondaland, and he's Daniel Robinson, who's just a brilliant writer. So we're very near finishing the pilot script, and as Tiffany says, she doesn't take no for an answer. So we'll get the show on TV where, much like the Fosters, Peter, you broke through, and that's thrilling, because I think it's making it easier for a lot of us to tell the stories. But my show is completely centered. They're not part of the story. They are the story. They are social workers who work with foster kids. They are kids in the system, based on true experiences of either people I've worked with or known. We want to get input from like Kids in the Spotlight and lots of young people to help us tell their stories. We're setting it at a big foster care agency in Los Angeles. The show is called Phoenix Rising, because it's not about how the kids come into care, it's what happens to them after, right? And we want more Antoines in the world, and we want more David Ambrose in the world. And they're out there, and when we can tell their stories, I think people will shift their thinking about having these children in their homes, right? So that's the objective, the goal of that. At the same time, though, telling really interesting stories, with millions of kids have gone through the system and hundreds of thousands of people who work in it. There's no limit to the kinds of stories we can tell. I'm sorry,
I think that's an important point, Rob. I think that the experiences of foster youth are so varied, different, hopeful, despair. There are more than anyone could ever tell in the space of time. I think that's an important reminder for who's listening to know the richness of the stories and how many of them are about struggle and possibility, and also the reminders of the lasting impact of what it's like to be in foster care, and what youth need to get them through it. So, Peter, you brought up an important point early on, the sort of default bad portrayal of foster youth. So they're sort of it's changing, but the default villains. And I'd like sort of some advice from you, and how to, keep changing that paradigm, and then throw out to all of you, how do you think that seeing, if we can change it to positive portrayals of youth in foster care in the media, will help impact not only the self-image of the youth, as well as, start to move hearts and minds across the broader spectrum? So sorry, two-part question, both for Peter, the second one to all of you.
So first of all, I have to say, Michael, thank you for bringing up that line. I want to give credit for that line. Joanna Johnson actually wrote that line. Bradley Bredewager and I created the pilot. Joanna came on to join us to co-run the show, and Joanna wrote that line. I remember reading it, and it was always the theme of the show, but to have it articulated so succinctly and so clearly was a really, really powerful moment, and I don't think it's one any of us will ever forget. So, look, the amazing thing that's happened in television over the last, let's say, 15 years is that it's gotten messy, right? It's gotten beautifully messy. And that's stories have gotten richer, and are the lens through which we're allowed to look at people on TV has gotten so much wider, because people, I think, finally realized that human stories told specifically are eminently relatable, right? So eminently relatable. So I think there is a really natural kind of hunger for complicated people. And foster kids are complicated people. They're kids who've been through trauma. Like, it's just that simple. And I think when they're looked at through that lens, you immediately start to engage with their humanity, and you immediately start to relate to them and to their very, very basic, very fundamental needs, right? The need to have a place to be safe, the need to have food, the need to feel like you belong somewhere, the need to feel like someone's looking out for you, and then that most fundamental need that drives almost all storytelling, the need to be loved. And I think as we continue to put people out into storytelling, as we ditch them, either center them in the narrative as Rob is doing, right? I think that show sounds incredible, and I can't wait to watch it. Or in the fabric of other shows, there's such an opportunity for television series for the sort of third lead who is a successful DA, for us to learn along the road, like, oh, I came up through foster care, and there's a million ways that can come out, and there's a million ways that can be manifested, but as we as creators build out our worlds, I think it's something that people either forget, or it doesn't occur to them, or they're afraid to touch it for whatever reasons. But it's a wonderful human story that can give us really powerful, exciting, fun, funny conversations to be had. It's simply a thing that happens, and that's what TV is about.
I agree. And I also think the characters inside the world, a lot of times you have characters who go, oh, you were adopted, as opposed to, oh, you were adopted. And the perceptions of those ancillary characters, and, not that we have to force everybody to be like, oh, you were adopted, that's so cool, but how awesome would it be if we could do that? And if the relationship isn't about, oh my gosh, because they're adopted, it's a mess, or this is a messy situation. Sure, it's a messy situation, but that doesn't mean they're a messy person. They've come from adversity. They've come from things that nobody else can understand. And if other characters can, unite with them to understand and help them, and vice versa, their experiences can help others, as opposed to the, oh, you were adopted. If we had more characters say, oh, you were adopted, tell me more, I think the world would be, the perception would also change, and we'd shift that conversation.
In doing Foster, one of the things that surprised us was the reception of the social workers. Many social workers have been so stigmatized that they don't like to say that they're social workers. And many people who become social workers become the wounded healer syndrome. They've come from families that have had problems. And in their own life, they haven't been able to solve the problems of their family. The problems may be abuse, it may be alcoholism. So they become social workers trying to do what they couldn't do in their families for other kids. And we portrayed social workers in a way that they hadn't been often seen. They've been stereotyped on television. And so many social workers told us afterwards, oh, this is the first time I've wanted my family or my relatives or friends to see what I actually do. So, I think we're all, reality, complexity is one of the responses to the kind of stereotype characters that we see. And that now more than ever, television is messy and moving into stories of more complicated people. And it's a great opportunity now to move beyond procedurals to more complex human interaction.
Thanks, Mark. You actually anticipated one of the other things I want everyone to talk about a little bit, because the other side of the system is the child welfare system itself. And the social worker in Foster is an extraordinarily compelling woman. And so I think I want to talk a little bit about that, just so people who are here and listening, may not be as familiar with the child welfare system as all of you are. And maybe we talk a little bit about the challenges of portraying that system in and of itself, the complexities, certainly there used to be significant confidentiality issues that have, to some extent, been eroded with the recognition that, sunshine brings better outcomes and transparency. So maybe Leah, because you want to maybe talk a little bit about the interaction you had with social workers, would that be helpful? And then, thinking on maybe how to portray them when you're looking at a narrative. Does that sound like a fair question for you?
Sure. I also wanted to chime in on something that Michael said, which is about the complexity of characters. A personal story about my son when he found out that he was adopted, because we didn't want it to be, a thing, right? And so we told him when he was he was still fairly young when everything was fine. I don't even know if it was all finalized, but we told him his origin story, and he went to school and told everyone he had 2 moms. And so, it just made me think about, it doesn't always have to be a serious thing when you're thinking about writing and telling stories. That was a funny day for us because we had to explain, the different ways you could have 2 moms, and that they're all great. So I just wanted to mention that. In terms of social workers, I would agree. And I definitely think that is a part of the process that has been, stereotyped. I had a wonderful social worker. She was absolutely fabulous. She was very committed and very honest about her workload. We became, buddies during the process. She also gave me information, like inside information. She taught me tricks of the trade. So that experience that I've seen is not, and some of the stereotypes I've even heard from other people is not accurate. It's like in any other industry, right? We think about, I'll just pick one, finance industry. There are people in the finance industry that, yes, all they do is love money and will, stab you in the back. And there are people who, only invest in green companies, or organizations, or who are very, have strong ethics. And so I think it's the same, process here. My boss in particular is very open to stories, and we have talked about, even though it's, again, I work on a sitcom, we've talked about, covering the foster experience. And she is the type of person, she is very adamant about researching and honoring everyone's background and experience. And so we haven't done it yet, but definitely something that we're looking at and that we want to do in a way that is respectful and that's funny, so.
We have our first audience, unless anyone wants to build on that and add on that. There were sort of the 2 questions again, the impact of negative and positive portrayals on, you think, that youth in foster care that are seeing them, one, and then the one about social workers. Antoine?
Well, I have to go way back to the subject of love and foster children. I met, of course, so many foster children as I was one growing up, and we all had different, not all of us, but there were some who had their situation was so different from mine that I really had to give them some thought. And sometimes a group of us would shun the ones that had different, these very different understandings of what love meant. And I was the kind of kid that didn't want people touching me and saying that I love you, or they were going to offer me their home. I was the kind of foster kid who said no. There was a woman at the orphanage where I stayed. She liked me. I didn't know she liked me. And when they shipped me off to the reform school to live, she asked if she could adopt me because she got to know me while I was at the orphanage. And they told me, and they were so excited. And I said no. And she said that she loved me. And it made me feel special. And I didn't like to feel special. In the movie, I wrote Derek, Luke, and Denzel are in the restroom, their last encounter together, and Denzel says, "I love you, son," and my character says, "I love you too." The reason why I put it in there is because he was the first person that told me that he loved me, and I believed it, and I understood what he meant. I understood the feeling of it. I know some children grow up and they immerse and they swim in love, but love is introduced to us, some of them, totally different, and it feels different, and it means something different. While we're thinking of the brighter side of, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but the brighter side of people's growing up in foster care, those children you'll never see on the 6 o'clock news or 11 o'clock news. Some kids that I was around wasn't resilient enough, and they could not. It was a thing that when I remember, I could never understand why my foster brother wanted to be with his mother, and he would run away at night. And the social services office asked his mother to keep him because everybody was worried about him leaving. He got a chance to meet her once. He told him what community she lived in, and he would run away every night. And I would stay up all night because I was worried about him too. Well, she decided that she would keep him because he was worried about him too. But then after about a month or two, she left. But she told him she loved him. And so his understanding of what love is was totally different. And I know that there are stories, like my story you could write about, and you have to introduce it in a certain way. You have to tell it in a certain way. I understood that because a lot of people are not ready for those kinds of stories. But I understood that I had to not tell the raw story of it, but I had to do it and give people a break and tell them what goes on sometimes in some children's lives. And when I wound up on the street, I wound up in the hands of criminals because I was emancipated, and they knew that every June 14th, there were going to be a new group of foster kids who were going to be emancipated with nowhere to go. And they were waiting for us. I had to maneuver through that summer. It was a horrible summer. I had 13 social workers during the time I was a foster kid, and I only met a few of them. But some of them I still know. There was a teacher that I had in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. She was like my mother. I would go to school as if it was home and go to the foster home as if it was a place I didn't want to be. Now, I could write the story of a beautiful story of a kid whose family, he lived on my street. His family owned a funeral home. We thought they were the richest people in the neighborhood. And one day he came to me. We were the same age. He came to me and he said, "What kind of work do your grandfather do?" My foster father was a landscaper. I said, "He's not my grandfather. He's my father." He said, "That old man is your father?" I said, "Well, he's my foster father, actually." He said, "I'm a foster child." I said, "You are?" He said, "Yeah. In fact, my parents are going to adopt me." And I was looking at him. I couldn't understand how he could be so loved because I understood his lifestyle. And he was the only kid that wore slacks, black shoes, and a white shirt and a tie to school in elementary school. And it gave me more to think about. I was the kind of kid who was a reflective kid, unlike my brother, but I would watch and look and learn. And I think by the time I got into the Navy, it gave me a chance to think about all that I had been through and all the people that I had met, kids that I knew when I take my physical at Children Family Service every year. And I wound up in an orphanage with them. This one particular kid, Lorenzo, I would see him every year, almost the time when we all had to take our physical. But when I was at the orphanage, he was burned. His mother had set him afire. And these are stories, and we may not want to tell these stories, and maybe not, but these kind of things go on. And these are the kids who are in most peril, not the ones who, like my friend who lived up the street from me. Sometimes I wonder if the story that is mine is sort of like just the way I told it, would be abandoned, and those children would be left off to do and whatever their lives becomes. And then we just tell the stories of my friend whose parents were funeral home owners. So love is an interesting thing for some foster children. While I was attracted to the idea, the people who were claiming to love me were always hurting me. And then I met I had the same teacher for the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and she would always say she loved us too. And I had to think about that. These were two different circumstances, people using the same word. The word started to interest me. At first, I wasn't interested. And then when this lady entered, I started becoming interested. And what does this word people keep using, what does it really mean? Does it hurt, or does it make you feel the way she makes me feel? And so you come through a childhood and you become a young adult, and you're on the street, and still people are pushing, even the hustlers are pushing the word love. And I'm like, it was only when I got into the Navy, when I got a chance to relax and to really think. And when I was talking to the Navy psychiatrist, and when he told me he loved me, I had gotten it by then. So I always tell my children now that I love them because I know what it means. I don't know if my foster parents even really understood what it means, but they were just using it because it was a word at their disposal. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Antoine. Wow. I think you bring up another essential part of the system are foster parents. And I feel like we should talk a little bit about foster parents, because just as there are many misperceptions about youth in foster care, there are many misperceptions about foster parents. Mark, Leah, you are one, we're one, FostAdopt. Mark, you told the story of a remarkable woman who was a foster parent. And I think it builds on Antoine. It's such an interesting, it builds on what you talk about love. What is love? What is it to bring a child into your home, not necessarily knowing whether they will become a permanent part of you? And what type of love is it? What is a foster parent? Mark, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because you did tell the story of a remarkable woman. And Leah, I'd love for you to comment on that as well, and everyone else, of course.
Mrs. Beavers is the person in our film who really came from a family of 18 children in the South. She was only able to have one child of her own. But when she got married, she said, I wanted a large family. 5 was enough, not 18. And when she could only have one child biologically, she decided to foster. And she has this sort of innate wisdom, patience, and capacity to see each child as that child is. And she's had all this tremendous, experience with all kinds of children. She started fostering babies who came for just infants who were there for 2-3 weeks. And then when we filmed her, her family consisted of young girls, and plus there was another young man who she had taken in as a child who was handicapped, who now lived with her. We looked for people like her. She was pointed out to us as somebody who was remarkable. So I cannot speak for all foster families or all foster parents, but she was someone who did this really out of love. When Antoine talks, there are different kinds of love. She is the kind of mother that we all would like to have had, someone who represents unconditional love. Although she had limits, she had boundaries, she had certain rules, but she was able to accept each child as who that child was she, and it was generally girls, entered the family.
Thank you.
Jennifer,
Leah,
if I could.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
No. After Leah. Yeah.
I'm thoroughly impressed by anyone who has that large capacity for so many children. I have other people in my life who have done that. For me, my experience with my son is that once we got into the education space, I had to quit my job to become his aide. I became an advocate with LAUSD. And so I can't even imagine having the capacity to support and love so many children to that level. I mean, that's just beyond my comprehension. I had to become my own attorney at one point because they don't really, I shouldn't say there are some people in the district that don't support students who are different learners the way they should. So my days and nights were consumed with how not only to support my son, but the other students that I felt were in the district and being ignored. And it led to me becoming a member of the Parent Advisory Committee. It led me to writing letters, to making phone calls all the way up to Sacramento, whoever I could get to listen. So that kind of became my ministry as a mother. Again, going back to the theme that everyone says, love. Once you love anyone and you see that they need you, it's like all bets are off. This was the thing that I needed to focus on in order to not only to change his trajectory, but the other students that I noticed were being marginalized. Once some administrators find out that your child is a foster child, they immediately start making assumptions. And so if I had allowed them to continue to treat him in a certain way, they would certainly do that with other students. So that became more my focus as opposed to taking on the great task of fostering more children. The opportunity had presented itself to me, but I just became a full-time, like, I'm going to fight this fight until I ended up feeling that he was safe and protected, and I returned back to the industry where I felt like I could do that and he would be okay. And that some of the things that I put in place would not only help him, but possibly help other parents and students.
Rob, did you want to?
Yeah, there's so many incredible things being said here that I'm making notes all over the place. One is Antoine, you talked about the kid next door. You didn't know he was in foster care. He didn't know you were in foster care. This is sort of the secrecy that's the veil of it, that's based in the shame of it, right? I mean, we even talk about foster kids. Well, they're not foster kids. They're kids who are growing up in foster care. They're not a different kind of kid. Mark, as you said, kids don't come into foster care because they did anything wrong. They come into foster care because somebody did something wrong to them, right? So before I adopted my daughter, years before, I was a foster parent in DC, and when my son came to live with me, he was 14, and I was his 23rd placement at 14 years old, right? So his social worker, who I really admired a lot, tried to tell me that he had something called reactive attachment disorder, right? Now, that's a sociopathology. That's a child who physiologically never attached to anybody and is a sociopath. This was not DeAndre. DeAndre didn't trust anybody because I was his 23rd parent in 14 years, which to me is a very logical response. Why on earth would he trust me? right? So I, had lots of conversations with him about trust is something I have to earn from you. It's not something you have to do anything about. And however long it takes is however long it takes, right? So Antoine, as you were saying, the people who said, I love you, I thought, I'm not going to say I love you to this kid who I've known for 3 weeks because he's not going to buy it, right? As the years went on, we developed a very strong relationship, and he's an adult now and off on his own. But that labeling, Leah, that you talked about, right? Labeling a kid with like attachment disorder is a really, really serious thing. And it's true for some kids, not for a kid like DeAndre. But I just remember a story where he came home from school one day. He had been talking about this girl he really wanted to ask out. And he was just so ashamed of being in foster care. And he was so embarrassed. He came home from school one day, and I had never seen him so happy. And I said, what's going on? He said, I finally talked to that girl, and she told me she's in foster care. And he said, now I understand what you go through as a gay man. Now I understand what coming out is. He said, because I came out to her that I'm in foster care too. And then they went out for a minute. But it was just an adorable little, that veil was lifted. And then in terms of foster parents, Jennifer, there are so many wonderful, wonderful, wonderful foster parents, Leah, as you have been, whose stories really don't get told. We talk about the sadists, and they're there. Antoine, you lived it. We can't ignore them, but we also have to hold up the people who are the valiant ones, the wonderful ones, the ones who hang in there, who don't get scared off, keep coming back for more, right? And they're there. And with my show, that's what I'm sort of hoping to hold up as well, as their stories.
It's so important, Rob. That's such a beautiful story. And I think, growing up in foster care, what happens is you hit all the words that my little soul was just, crumbling over, which is shame and, truth and trust. I had learned later in life, thanks to therapy. This is the other thing. I was very fortunate to have a therapist and a social worker who really wanted to get to know me, not diagnose me. That was very important. And a lot of kids don't have that, and parents end up having to advocate or be advocates and not diagnose, but to really lift the veil and lift the layers and get in and see who this child really, really is and what they really need. And I think that's another thing we need to do as storytellers is there's want and need. Growing up, I thought I wanted parents to love me in a certain way and tell me certain things and show me who I was going to be when I grew up. And, later in life, I learned I bounced around so much that I was always lying to myself, and I found myself struggling to understand who I was. And I think what a great foster parent does is allow you to explore who you are unconditionally, allow you to have your outbursts of emotions and have those things that you truly need in order to flourish and thrive. And they don't have all the answers, and that's the beauty. I don't think any parent does, and that's why any show about a family, whether they are a chosen family or they are a biological family, those are the themes that come up so much. And love is different for everybody else, but trust is the foundational element there. I was told later, and some might know this, so because I bounced around so much and I had identity issues, later in life I got tapped on the shoulder to work undercover and be a spy, in simpler terms. But the first thing that happened to me, the man, if you will, my handler who brought me in and recruited me, said, trust is a circle. And I was like, what? And he drew this tiny little circle on a piece of paper, and he said, the people inside the circle you let in that tiny, tiny little circle, if you put somebody in that circle, the damage they can do to you is far greater than leaving somebody out of that circle of trust. And, he goes, someday I hope you're inside this circle and we're in and you can trust me. And I understand if you don't now, but I hope to earn your trust. And it blew my mind because growing up, that's the other foundational element I never understood. I never trusted anybody, especially, unfortunately, I never met my biological father. And I had a mother who kept saying, my biological mother, don't worry, you're going to come back and live with me. So then I had trust issues with my mother. And I think those are the elements that we have to talk about in our daily lives. You know, as foster parents, we have to trust ourselves that we don't know all the answers, but again, back to love. Love is going to conquer all, and it's okay to fail, and it's okay to not understand what being a parent is, and if all these emotions inside you. I can go on and on, but at the end of the day, I think that the core values of feeling shame is because we don't trust anybody to be ourselves. And when we find a family that really, really loves us and we understand love, like Antoine said, that's when, you know, that release happens, and then we get to know ourselves, right?
Yeah, I think for me, the most shameful part of everything was that I didn't know who my parents were or where I came from or anything about myself. I had a middle name and I didn't even know it. I didn't know anything about myself. And I had discovered that I was a foster kid when I was about 7. I didn't even know anything about any of that. And I had been with these people since I was 2. And as soon as we learned that we were foster children, they just let us have it, you know. So everybody was able to make it clear that we weren't members of the family. And I know, like I said, I know other children were having different kinds of lives, like Michael, and you know, was having a different kind of life. And I could see, like my friend who lived up the street, he had a basketball hoop on his garage in the backyard. I'd be back there all the time. His mom would come out and sit on the back porch and watch us. I thought he had the greatest mother in the world, you know, and she'd like take us to McDonald's, hop in the car and go. And I thought this was his mother. And when he said that he was a foster kid, he was excited about me being a foster kid. And I was like stunned because I didn't know. I thought it was a rule that you have to be treated different if you're not a member of the family. But I mean, yes, I wish that she was my foster mother. I could see myself, you know, doing, you know, I don't know about the funeral home part, but I could see myself dressed like he was dressing. I could see myself, you know, being walked to school. Sometimes mom would walk him to school and I would walk with them, and, you know, she'd go on, and it was just, that was the first person, one of the first adults that gave me a clue that things could be different. My teacher was one, and the whole thing about trust, that was the thing. My teacher, I trusted her because I knew her for 3 years, and she treated us all the same. She knew I was a foster kid. She never treated me different. When I was in the Navy, it was the commander, and that's what made it easy for me to accept him saying that he loved me, and it made it super easy. It just came out. I didn't even was planning to say it. I would never say that to anybody, but I did it. I didn't feel ashamed about it or anything, and it just was a natural thing. And I do think everything has to begin with trust when it comes to kids. And as soon as they hit the door, when they hit the door and you're trying to shower them with love and attention, some kids are not. Some kids have lived. I described myself, by the time I was 10, I was like a tire on a car that was bald from all the wear and tear. I was done. And it's hard to imagine someone that young being done, but there's a lot of kids there. And these kids are important because these are the ones you'll read about in the paper. My friend who was destined for college when he was born, you know, when he came into those people's homes, he was going to be all right because he trusted them and they loved him, and so I was really fortunate.
Sorry, Antoine. I'm gonna exercise my terrible privilege as moderator because we have to have a little bit of time for audience questions, because obviously what you guys have said has sparked a lot of interest. But before we do, and sorry, Antoine, I know we're short for time, so it's my job, unfortunately. It's like the social worker being the people mover. That's my role. Before we go to an audience question, I think everyone's touched a lot upon the issue of labeling and the completely heinous impact of foster youth being labeled, not wanting to come out. So how do we build an environment where we tell those stories so the labeling becomes less? I mean, Peter, you mentioned that you've had youth who are in foster care come to the set and use them. I think, how can we best make sure that we're being honest, truthful in telling these stories? What's the best way to go about that? Because I think now that you've inspired everyone in the audience to be thinking about this, what's the best way to tell the stories honestly and to help use this medium that you all work in to shift the attitudes so that it's not shameful to be a youth in foster care or even a social worker or a foster parent? So that's that multi-level question, Peter, that I'm going to throw at you.
I'm happy to be thrown at. I think the first thing is to just don't presume that you know. Don't presume that you know the answers. You will be wildly thrilled and surprised if you ask the questions. There are sort of truisms about all sorts of groups of people, but they're always, dynamic and exciting and thrilling specificities when you get inside those things, right? There are, yes, foster kids have trust issues. That's a truism, right? We think it's understandable, but inside that, there's all sorts of variations. There are kids who are desperate for affirmation. There are kids who can't handle it. It's painful to them to experience it. So, just the being willing to ask, the being willing to sit with people and listen to their stories, the being willing to have your perceptions challenged, and the being willing to share those versions of the truth with the world, the ones that are perhaps inconvenient or perhaps a little more difficult to articulate. That's, I think, what's really exciting and the opportunity and privilege that we're all given as storytellers.
So, bigger question that came from the audience, which I think is very interesting. Do you think there's a way that you can use storytelling to help actually reform the system itself?
Yes, is the answer. Yes. Television is, I think, Mark, you touched on it, right? It's the most powerful thing in our lives right now. How can it not? It influences all kinds of things that we see, right? And the ways that we tell those stories shapes people's minds. Look at it in the reverse. I think people's attitudes about foster kids have been shaped by the ways that their stories have been told, right, in negative ways. And social workers depicted as lazy and bureaucrats, and foster parents as only in it for the money. Those are imprinted in people's minds because of the way they've been told. We can shift that narrative by just telling different stories. It's not easy, but we bring those people into people's homes and then say, I would have a kid like that in my house. Why wouldn't I? Who wouldn't want that child? But if we don't ever see them, they don't have the opportunity to think that.
Often, when you see foster care in the news because a child has died, there's something, or there's been a failure in the system. It's a train wreck. And so that's what shaped the perception of foster care in the minds of a lot of people. And people don't want to see films about foster care. There's a bias. God, this is going to be dark. This is going to be painful. This is a social problem that I can do nothing about. So I think it's up to us to try to change that perception. And it takes more than one story to do that. And I think it takes people looking at the kinds of films that everyone has produced, that where we see that we can where the audience can identify with those characters. Because a lot of the problems that foster kids face, Leah talks about problems learning. These are problems that are prevalent in all families. They're not just confined to the kids who are in foster care. So I think if people can see programs in which they can connect with the issues and particularly connect with the characters, I think that helps to change the perception. But it's not something that can happen overnight.
Well, and I think Leah also made a point that humor is okay. I think we forget, it seems like it's such a serious subject that we always have to address it very seriously. But to your point, there are very funny things that happen when you're mixing, families and cultures, and you're bringing together blended families. There's stuff that emerges from that is fun and funny and joyful. And I think reminding people that it's okay to integrate that into stories about foster care.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I'm so thrilled to be working with Tiffany on this, because she makes everything funny, right? I don't know if you read her book about her experiences in foster care. She takes all those really bad experiences and it's laugh out loud at this book, because everything can be looked at through different lenses and different, views, right? So yeah, we have to have.
Okay, I have a funny story of something that happened to me and my foster brother when we were about 7 years old. We shared a room. We slept in bunk beds, but there were a bed on the other side of the room. Social service would sometimes bring children in the night. So when we would wake up, sometimes there would be a kid there. And so one morning, I woke up first and there was a kid in the other bed, but it was a white kid. And I had never seen a white kid before. And I jumped out of bed. I kicked my brother, and he said, he hopped up, but I left the room, ran out of the room before I could see him waking up. And I ran downstairs where my foster mother was cooking breakfast, and I said, "There's a white man in our room." And she said, "Boy, there ain't no white man in your room." She said his name is Stephen or something like that. And she said he's just a boy, and they brought him in the night, and they're gonna get him. He stayed like 2 days though. But when I came back upstairs, my brother and he was just talking like they were old friends. I was like, and so within 5 minutes I was talking with him too. But it was a shock. It was a shock because this was the 70s, and in Cleveland was very segregated at the time. So you wouldn't see any white people unless you went downtown or turned on the television. But here this kid was. His hair was blonde. I think his eyes were green. And he was sitting on the bed like this. I was like, wow. So I felt like that was a funny experience that I had. I had so many, but that was something that was different.
Jennifer, if I may, I just wanted to talk about using the medium to affect change. I hear all the time. I still get tweets and texts and emails from people saying, "I'm going to be a foster parent because of the show," and it's important to me, and that's such a beautiful, beautiful kind of resonance of the work, and it makes me deeply, deeply happy. But if we want to create change, we also have to support the organizations that are doing that. Organizations like FosterMore, like and if you want to tell a foster story, go to an organization that's doing great foster work, and then weave them into it. Weave them into the actual story. Put them on the screen. Put Casa of LA on the screen. Use the people who are in the trenches and doing it. Even in fictional work, where we on Good Trouble, there's a whole narrative about Black Lives Matter and Dignity and Power Now. These are organizations, real organizations on the street in LA doing real work, and so they're out there, and I think weaving them into our fictional worlds, as long as it's done with care and integrity, it can be really, really powerful and connect a lot of eyeballs to a movement. And so it's just one additional layer, I think, in terms of how we can think about telling these stories and activating the audience that we have.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. Thank you. Rob, you look like you had something to say, Rob.
Always, when Nia's out visiting us and we watch the show Pose. Now, to see a show about trans girls of color in New York, it was those kids I started volunteering with in like 1989, 1990. Never, ever would I have dreamt there would be a television show about those exact kids. And that Billy, who also went to Carnegie Mellon, who frankly struggled at some points in his career, Billy Porter, right? Because of the kind of man that he is. And a lot of people didn't embrace that, right? And here he is winning an Emmy for Best Actor. TV can, and now we get to see a lot of what these trans women are going through and have gone through in a way that we've just never seen on television before. That's just one example. There are so many of, in this medium ways that we can shift people's perceptions.
And we have a crisis right now at the border too. And, there is an organization called Save the Children. They're internationally known. I would also encourage people to check them out and throw whatever you can, $1, whatever, or even your time, because we're about to have an influx of children who need help. And it's not only children that grow up, you know, with a tragedy in the suburbs or, you know, in the concrete jungle of an urban environment. It is also right here at our borders. And I think people are afraid to talk about that too. And I think that's also where great, not storytelling comes from, but great triumphs and tragedy and things we can relate to and things we can do as storytellers is also amplify the voices who need to be heard, like these young children who come across, you know, if you've heard Biden's address today, there was a young boy from Honduras, 9 years old, came by himself 1,000 miles, and now he has nowhere to live. What do? You know, so please, you know, let's not also, it's great to talk about it in the sanctity of the writer's room or get research, but I think we also have to also do the real work like we do as storytellers and help others too when we can.
That's a good point, and that's the kind of young man that may well end up sadly in foster care in this country, an unaccompanied minor. So it's a good reminder of all the places that the youth may be coming from. And also I want to remind everyone of the wealth of resources we have in Los Angeles. Leah mentioned Stand Up, and I have worked with them, the group that goes and works with the homeless youth in Venice, and there are a lot of youth in foster care. So there are many, the good thing is there are many more organizations serving youth in foster care than there used to be. So for those of you who are writing and storytelling and inspired by the people here, there are numerous resources, and I hope that FosterMore, that's one of the things we do, you will turn to the people on this panel, but also turn to FosterMore to ask about those resources, and if there's resources you want in your storytelling and organizations that you want to engage and volunteer with, or if you want to, you know, if you're interested in becoming a foster parent or a mentor or a CASA, or, you know, starting to dig deeper into this world we've introduced you to tonight, I hope that you will come to us or the people on the panel. I mean, I think what's been so wonderful about hearing from all of you, and thank you for your candor and your inspiration and sharing your experience across the board. I think we've just, you know, come away thinking so much about resiliency and the different forms of love and how we can change the labels imposed upon foster youth. And for those of you who are writing and creating these incredibly rich and complex characters that are out there to populate your screen and your work, and in so doing, move people to think differently about these youth and about the system and potentially get involved and involved in changing it. So again, thank you to all of you. Thank you to the people who listened to this. And I hope that you will take the inspiration tonight and turn it into stories we look forward to seeing on all the screens that we look at, and potentially changing some lives out there of youth in foster care. So having said that, would anyone else like to say some final words? Because they came to hear you. So we have 2 more minutes, as I said, as the moderator / people mover or people quieter. I don't know what my role is. If anyone, please spend the last 2 minutes if you have anything you'd like to add. Nope. Well, good. Thank you to everyone. Stay safe out there. Thank you again to the Writers Guild and to Greg, who was absolutely masterful at pulling all of this together, all the pieces and all the invitations and everything. So we really appreciate it. And I think that this evening is going to make a big difference for the work everyone is doing in this field. So thank you, all that you've done, all the things you've created and will continue to create. Much appreciated for the work you do.
Thanks.
Thank you.